Hi, it's Dwyer, December 1st, 2022. GamblersAdvisory.com, a free site. Always 1776.com, a free site. Right? Please don't consider anything I say in this video to be financial advice. I'm just talking for myself. I'm just sharing what I'm considering or pursuing. Remember, the opinion you should follow should be your own. Just consider this video to be a second opinion from a complete stranger online. Now, I need for people to realize that they shouldn't get too caught up in what we know in the moment. Because quite frankly, we don't know what we don't know. So, some time ago in baseball, several star players, professional athletes who had influence over young kids, who had many young fans, who people looked at as athletes, people who knew about physical fitness. Understand, many of them used to endorse cigarettes and tobacco products. Right? When I was a kid, this is during my life, you had a lot of baseball players chewing tobacco, spitting on the field. Some had huge tobacco mounds in their mouths. Luis Tiant, the Boston Red Sox pitcher, for example. We did not know or publicly accept that cigarettes and chewing tobacco could cause cancer. Right? We just didn't know it. Let me point out, too, that there used to be smoking sections in enclosed areas like planes. Right? You're on a plane, couldn't leave. This isn't like the smoking section in a restaurant where you could say, hey, let's leave this restaurant. No, you couldn't leave. You're on a transcontinental flight, and there was a smoking section. Right? The concept of secondhand smoke just wasn't publicly appreciated. More recently, in the NFL, and this is during my life, we did not know or publicly acknowledge that the protective gear, the helmets that players wore, right, as part of their uniform, right, and their uniform has shoulder pads and other protective gear. We did not appreciate that the helmets did not fully protect the athlete from having traumatic brain injury. Hell, we did not even know what CTE was. Let's talk about the economy, right, and academia. You see all these academics, Christine Lagarde, Janet Yellen. You see all of them making comments on the economy. Folks, it's a mistake to think that we know it all on the economy. Understand, different countries, including countries with a lot of academics and a lot of universities and a lot of history, different countries have different approaches, right? That's how much of a lack of consensus we have. That shows how lost we are when it comes to coming up with optimal economic strategies. Some of the strategies used by some of these countries with economies that have higher per capita incomes are wrong. Japan, the envy of the world in the 1980s. You might recall people talking about the Japanese economic miracle, right? We wanted to know how Japan was doing it. Japan had not only a high GDP, growing GDP, but Japan also had a very vibrant real estate market on a global level. Well, understand now 3 decades later, Japan has a debt to GDP ratio, Google this, of greater than 2 to 1. Folks, it's much higher than the United States of America's, and it's increasing. Clearly, the Japanese have done something wrong. The proof is in the results. That massive endangers the existence of the country. Understand, the United Kingdom, another economy with a rich history, went financially insolvent, couldn't pay its bills, and had to be rescued by outside financiers in the 1970s, again, during my life. Right? So, what I want people to realize is sometimes the people at the top don't know what they're doing. The Fed chairman in the 1970s, Arthur Burns, is no longer viewed as a role model for central bankers. Fed Chairman Powell doesn't want to follow his example because we view what Burns did in terms of money printing as contributing to the inflationary environment of the 1970s. Let's be clear here too. Inflation is regressive. In other words, it hurts working class people far more than it hurts the wealthy. Right? It's the working class and middle class that get decimated in an inflationary environment. Focus on the harm. When a politician who is creating inflationary policies tells you that they haven't raised taxes, they're lying to you because they've decreased your standard of living. That's what inflation does. You understand that lesson quickly when you go to the supermarket to buy eggs and milk for your children, and suddenly the price has jumped by 10%. Right? Your salary hasn't jumped. Rather, your price has jumped. So you have less for everything else. Your standard of living has dropped. Right? So, I have some advice. Let me also point out, too, I mentioned Arthur Burns. I could have mentioned Alan Greenspan. We're not talking about outliers. Right? One man's opinion. Many of these Fed chairmen don't know what they're doing. Many of the world leaders don't know what they're doing. They're exacerbating problems. These are the firemen who show up to your house with gasoline. Right? How could world leaders be clueless on the energy crisis that was going to result from them supporting the Ukraine after the Russian invasion? So let me just give some advice here. And understand, I'm not trying to be mainstream, because I don't believe that being mainstream is always right. History has shown us that it hasn't been right for prolonged periods of time. So my advice to people watching this video is to think for yourself. Do the math yourself. Also, to be aware of history. Right? I talk with friends who seem to think that recessions are supposed to come and go in 18 months. Folks, you know that's not history. What about the 1930s? How many years did that Great Depression last? How about the 1970s? Look at the stock market from 1968 to 1982. Right? Again, 68 to 82. Get the actual data. And then ask yourself the question. Is there any guarantee, any assurance whatsoever that the stock market is going to rise after an 18-month lull? I can tell you that history tells us the answer is no. Also, be aware of other points of view. Right? If you believe something, research the people who believe the opposite or who are critics of your point of view. So let's ask a foundational question here, and I'm going to leave it open. Did FDR, right, a president who was viewed as a hero when I was a kid in the 1970s, folks, it was uncontested, at least, in my very blue part of Queens, New York City. Did FDR save the country in the 1930s? Or, as Thomas Sowell, right, an academic at the Hoover Institution, an African American raised in Harlem, right? Is Thomas Sowell correct in his assessment that FDR's policies actually prolonged the Great Depression? Right? Understand, don't fall for the trap of intellectual orthodoxy, right? Of trying to adhere to a party line. Your goal shouldn't be about any political party. Your goal should be about shepherding your money, figuring out the truth, figuring out what you think and why you think it. Right? I'm not here shilling for any political party. Right? Quite frankly, their views change over time. You'd be surprised how, if you look at a political party long enough, they're going to pivot and they're going to be incompatible with the former view of themselves. Right? What I want people to ponder, and I'll just tell you what I believe. He's not considered a great president, but yet he inherited the depression that followed World War I. Right? Warren G. Harding, remember that name. He ran on the platform of a return to normalcy. He's the first president, believe it or not, who gave a speech against lynching south of the Mason-Dixon line. Right? Well, just understand, his strategy to address the depression of the early 20s led to the roaring 20s. Right? The strategy included things like cutting the federal government by 50%. Right? Popping a government bubble. Now, I believe that anything less is going to lead to years of malaise. And understand, malaise was a word used by former President Jimmy Carter. Right? I know many people disagree with me, and that's fine. I understand the political will is not there. Recognize the times you're in. Right? The political will is not there for the strategy and the results that Warren G. Harding spawned. Understand, too, one of the great Renaissance stories of the 1920s was the Harlem Renaissance. Right? People of color, people who look like me, thriving. Well, just understand that there are people out there, Michael Burry, who released some statements within the last 48 hours that I agree with. Right? Nouriel Roubini. Now understand, I don't agree with Burry and Roubini on everything. I don't agree with anyone on everything, because I think for myself. But just understand that Burry and Roubini are talking about years of malaise, years of a flat to declining stock market, right? Much higher interest rates, no magical Fed pivot that's going to put us on track for a bull market. I understand there are some out there who feel we're on the verge of a bull market. Luke Longo, an investment guru who I follow, who I disagree with on that, right? But again, it's important to get the opposite point of view. So, what I want to do here is talk about an investment I'm pursuing, right? Again, please don't consider this to be investment advice. But in times like this, and I live in Silicon Valley, Northern California, right, where companies like Meta are laying off thousands, right, where you have companies like Google openly talking about needing to get more productivity out of their workers. Suddenly, a place where workers historically can exhale a little bit will overlook Google's high attrition rate. Now the employer is telling its workers, hey, you're going to have to buckle down. Right? These are challenging times. If you're a Google investor, you've looked at their ad numbers and you realize the ad market right now is decreasing. Right? In tech, let's just say that you haven't had this level of layoffs in quite some time. Now, just understand, I believe the housing market has been out of control. Right? Out of control. I've represented some realtors. I myself have a realtor license, right? Broker's license. I'm a lawyer. I don't really participate as a broker in the real estate market. But let's just say that the numbers I'm looking at, median income in an area versus the median price of a house have been out of whack for several years. Understand, the relative money in different asset classes changes over time. It's been out of whack for years. When my parents bought a house, right, let's just say that it was about 4 times the median value, their median incomes. And that was in New York City, right? That was in Queens, New York City, in the early 70s. Now the number has jumped precipitously. Where I am right now in San Jose, the number's in the double digits. Right? And understand, when I'm out in San Jose, at a supermarket or at the post office, right, and I'm looking at my neighbors, I'm talking with my neighbors, I know my neighbors. Some of them are, middle class, regular people. And you just look at them and you think, wow, how is it that they're in a neighborhood that can have house prices, the median house price, be more than 10 times the average annual wage, yearly wage? And then you start to realize that it wasn't always so. Because many of my neighbors bought their homes in the 70s and 80s when the multiple was much lower. Right? Don't get seduced by the current multiple. Ask yourself the simple question: is it sustainable? So now, in places like Austin, Texas, Las Vegas, Nevada, right, housing is falling again. Things run in cycles. Right? And you understand that inflation's on the rise. Right? The unemployment rate, quite frankly, is a lagging indicator. The Fed has been increasing interest rates. Understand, too, the Fed's power is limited. It doesn't reach euro dollars overseas. Google that concept. Right? And so what I want people to consider is the idea that unemployment is just starting to rise. We're not close to what I feel is coming, which is at least 8% unemployment. Now, before you think I'm crazy, please do us all a favor. Research history. Research 8% unemployment. See if it's happened in the past. If it has, you know it's possible. Okay, here again, the proof is in the pudding. I talk with people and I hear that can't happen. How can you say that when it's already happened in the past? Multiple times. Now, understand what happens when you have rising rates and rising unemployment. You're going to have some homeowner looking at their adjustable rate mortgage saying, man, it's jumped. I can't afford it anymore. Right? You're going to have someone get a pink slip and realize that as they apply for other jobs, even using all these new internet tools to apply for jobs, they're facing a lot more competition for those jobs. In the Bay Area, when Meta lays off thousands, right? Just understand what happens. When Amazon lays off thousands, you're going to have a lot of top quality resumes, right? Employers are going to also have pricing power, right? So many people are going to be desperate for jobs so they can afford the higher egg and milk prices for their families. That if that job offer comes in, but the salary is a little bit light, a lot of people are going to say, hey, who am I to negotiate? I need this job. They're going to take the job. So I'm expecting in this fragile job market, in this fragile economy, with multiples that quite frankly are not sustainable, haven't been for years. Generation Z, in the comment section of this YouTube video, tell us your stories about thinking about buying a house, about what your parents paid for their house relative to what they were earning, and the houses in your neighborhood that you were thinking about buying, and the prices and the interest rates that you were being offered by lenders. Right? Understand, if a generation is being priced out of the housing market, the multiple is too high. The financing costs are too high. Markets tend to correct imbalances like that. So, I'm expecting housing, which has dropped a lot already, to drop much more. Right? Understand, as George Gammon, the rebel capitalist, says here online, it's all about probabilities, not certainties. Right? But I believe, as do Burry, as does Rubini, I believe that there's a distinct possibility of a prolonged downturn. What do you think that's going to do to the housing market? So, I've recently started shorting housing. Right? Let me point out that shorting's normally a difficult thing to do. But there's an easier way in this ETF world. I want people to take a hard look. Well, in fact, let me not make a recommendation here. Let me just keep it on track where I'm just telling you what I'm doing. I'm impressed by the ProShares Ultra Short Real Estate ETF. The symbol is SRS. Right? I want to make it easy for myself to buy the short, right? It's an inverse ETF. You don't have to be a master in terms of managing your margin in your brokerage account. Right? They've made it easy for you. I would encourage people to research inverse ETFs in the real estate space. I've chosen SRS. Right? You decide if a move is right for you. It's your decision. Right? But I've started shorting the real estate market because, quite frankly, I think things in real estate are going to get much worse. Now, understand what an inverse ETF is. It means the worse things are in real estate, right? The more price declines that happen in real estate, the greater the value of your ETF holding, right? It's inverse to performance. So understand the risk involved. If real estate explodes, right? If suddenly happy days are here again, right? You could lose your entire investment, right? Just understand the risk. Inverse ETFs are not for everyone. But if, like me, you've reached the conclusion that the current real estate market is overvalued, that's the word. Let's just underline it. Overvalued. If you believe that the current real estate market is overvalued, and we're going to undo many years of price appreciation, then an inverse ETF like SRS is worth investigating, right? So I've bought into the ProShares Ultra Short Real Estate ETF, right? I'm going to continue my research. Understand, school never ends, folks. I don't care what degree you have. School never ends. Every day is an opportunity to do research, right? To read, to be online, to learn every day. And my point to you is, just like you can make money when things are going up by being on board on stocks that are appreciating in value, you can make money when things are going down, right? And you don't need to have a nice fat, margin relationship with your brokerage account. You can just buy an inverse ETF. Know your exposure, right? Not be subject to the same level of margin calls that you are when you yourself are shorting the stock in your brokerage account. So again, I encourage people to read and investigate. What I'm doing is I'm in the ProShares Ultra Short Real Estate ETF. It's a 2X one, right? It will give you twice the profits per unit of drop in the housing market, right? The symbol is SRS. That's what I'm pursuing, in addition to, of course, the investments I've discussed in earlier videos. That's how I see it. Let me hear from you. I hope you leave your comments in the comment section of this YouTube video. Thanks for stopping by.